Hey guys, so in this video we are going to implement the score. So let me show you how the score works in this game. So I have this screenshot of the original game where you can see how many points you get for many things. So the first thing you get is you get 10 points for each step, and this means that as the frog is moving up, each time you move one row up than before, it gets 10 points. Then you get 50 points for every frog that you can get to home. So when you get a frog here at home, you get 50 points. You get 1000 points by saving all the frogs, by filling all the 5 homes. And it is also a bonus points for the remaining time. We don't have the time yet, so we are going to implement all these three first scores, and then probably on the next video, I'm still not sure, when we implement the timer, we'll update the score also with these 10 points by remaining second. So let me show you, okay, how is it going to look. So like here, so you can see we have this up here, which is exactly like I saw in the game, at least the one that I have been trying on. So you have like one up, and you have like here the score with 5 digits. And then you see that when I go up, it increases 10 points. But if I come down and go up again, it does not increase anymore because we already reached that area. But if we go sorry, up again, then we have 10 points, more 10, 10, and 10. Okay. And until we reach the homes. And now let me try to reach one of the homes. And when we get to one of the homes, we get 50 points. And then we go back to the beginning, and it also resets the distance that we traveled. And it's like this. So let me show you what we need to do to get the score working here. So the first thing that I did was, okay, I'll come back here in a minute, was just to add a score attribute for the game. That's basic. So we go to the game manager, which is where we are going to be dealing with the whole game logic. And I added an attribute called score of type number, which is hidden. And I also added an increment score block. So basically, when I want to increment the score for all those actions, I can just use the block increment score by increment, and the increment I can just give the value that I want to use. And we'll go into this in just a bit. So you can see that, okay, this, don't worry about this right now, but you can see to increment the score value, I just use the block increment score by the increment value that I'm using. And so the first case where we are incrementing the score, we are going to deal with this one first. So the 50 points for every frog that arrives home. And we know that when a frog arrives home, we are using this method called this block called frog wins. This is the block that we are using when we can get a frog inside one of the homes. And what I did here, you can see that I have increment score by 50, but I have some other condition here. And what I did here is that you get 50 points for each frog that reaches a home, but when you fill all the 5 homes, you get 1000 points, and usually you go to the next level. So I had to create also that condition here. And you can see that I have a condition that says if for this scene, I'm going to the behavior house spawner, and I'm seeing if it's all occupied. And this is a new attribute that I created on the house spawner to know if all houses are already occupied or not. So let me show you the house spawner. So here I created two new attributes. One is the occupied houses count, and one is all occupied. And what I'm doing is that each time, so no, here I don't need to do anything. So here, where we were before calling the frog wins, and this needs to be done before, because afterwards we are going to be using these values. What I'm doing is that, so we fill one house, and I'm incrementing so the occupied houses count by 1. And then I check if the occupied houses count is equal to the number of items in house, meaning that when all houses are occupied, I just set the other attribute is all occupied to true. And this second attribute is just so that on the other side, on the game manager, I don't need to be doing this kind of mess. I mean, we know, and I know, and we know that we only have 5 houses. But so I could just compare on the game manager. Okay, if have a counter and say, or just use here the counter occupied house count, and when occupied house count is equal to 5, then it's all occupied. I could just use this value occupied houses count on the other side on the game manager and compare it to 5. But my idea here is always to have my idea here, and even when we are programming, is always to have the more flexibility possible. So if I want to change the number of houses later, I don't need to worry about any of this because I just need to increase the number of regions, which I will need to do if I add new houses. But if I increase the number of regions, I will increase the number of items in the houses, and so this code still works. So this is always a good practice to create the code the most like generic way possible, you know. So don't use or try not to use like a static values like 5. Instead of putting 5, I'm using the length of the number of houses, which is always a good practice. And so now that I have this is all occupied, that's the attribute that I'm using here on the game manager. So I'm accessing the value of is all occupied from the behavioral spawner, and if all houses are occupied, I increment score by 1000, and I added here a comment that says next level. I don't actually know how comments work here in the Stencyl. Maybe they appear in the log viewer, I'm not sure. But this is just so I can remember that when we reach this point, I should, and I need to add the logic to create the next level, maybe reset the game and change some variables. But if the houses are not all occupied, then I do what we were doing before. So I only increment the score by 50, I kill the player. This is a new variable that I'm going to show you in a minute, and I spawn the player again at the initial position. And yes, so this is for incrementing the score when the frog reaches the houses. And the actual value of the increment score, the actual block of the increment score, you can see that besides this increment that increments the variable score, I added a new one, a new score label, which is a text variable. And what I'm doing here is I'm updating the score label with the value of the score. So I'm not actually going to draw the variable score on screen. I'm going to use a score label, and this is because I want the value to always have like leading zeros. So our value always have 5 digits, and if the score is 10, I need to add the remaining zeros that we need to fill this 5-digit number. So I'm doing that as text, and the way to do it is I'm setting the score label to the value of score as text. So let's say if it's 10, it's going to be 10, but in text, not a number. So it's a text with 2 characters. And then I'm seeing that if the score label length, if the length of the text, let's say it is 10, so its length would be 2, is less than 5, which is the 5 digits that I want, then I'm creating a block that is going to add all the zeros that I need. So this block is going to repeat the same amount, or the same difference between 5 and the actual length of the score label. So if the score label has a length of 2, the block will repeat 3 times. And inside, I'm updating the score label to 0 plus the score label. So this block is from the text. Actually, I'm using a lot of blocks here from the text that we haven't seen yet. So you have on the numbers and text, and you have the conversion, anything as text, which is the one that I'm using here. And then you have text length, so the number of characters in the text and text. And what this does is joins the 2 texts together, which is the one I'm using here to join 0 and the actual value that we have on the score label. And this is it. And the length, these are the blocks that I'm using from the text. So what I'm doing, every time I increment the score, I increment the number variable score, and I transform that variable into a text variable that has that number, but with leading zeros to complete a 5-digit number. And And this, the score label, is the variable or the attribute that I'm actually using to draw the text on the screen. And how do we draw text on the screen? We have these blocks here on the drawing section, and you have drawing, and you can see that we have draw text. And we also have on the styles, we have blocks to set the font. So I use the same font that I was using on the other game for the Space Invaders, which is this one, Retro Gaming. I'm going to put the font in a shared folder with all the assets for you guys to download. And also the link probably for the original font. So Retro Gaming. And first of all, we need to create a new font. So you can come here to the fonts, you can create new. And when you create a new font, you can choose the font that you want to create and just use the TrueType font file to create the font in the game. Then you can set a size for the font, which I 18, and also a default color. And this is something that we need to check because we need to, in this case, you can see that I'm using two different texts, one with a font white and one with a font red. And I was expecting that I could just change the font color before drawing the text, but we can't. At least it didn't seem that way. So what I ended up doing is creating two fonts with different colors. So you can see that I have a Retro Gaming and a Retro Gaming Red, which is exactly the same, but I just changed the color to red. And you can actually, you don't need to import everything else again. You just need to like duplicate one font and change the parameters that you want. And so I'm using the Retro Gaming to draw this first part, and I'm using the Retro Gaming Red to draw the text. So now that we have a font, to draw the actual values on screen, you add an event of drawing, and all these blocks need to be used inside a drawing block, because if you try to use any of these blocks outside, it gives you an error instantly. So I'm guessing that you need to use these blocks on this type of blocks, a drawing block. And what I'm doing here is that first I'm setting the current font to Retro Gaming, which is the white one, and I'm drawing the text one up at 77.0. And the values I just got from here, I just positioned it here and I got, okay, 77.0. And then I'm changing the current font to Retro Gaming Red, and I'm drawing the text from the value of the score label at 64.20, which is the value that I got for this label right here. And it seems strange to be constantly setting the font and drawing, but remember that this is running in a loop, so we need to be constantly, okay, change the font to this one and draw this text, and change the font again and draw this text. So we don't have a place to just change this font for this text, so we need to be doing this in a loop. That's why we need to add this on a drawing block, and we need to be constantly changing the fonts or the colors. I mean, you can change the color, because I tried to change the color here with a set fill color or a set stroke color, and it didn't work. That's why we are using different fonts with the score label. Yeah, okay. So this is what we use to draw the fonts, to draw this on screen. We already saw how to increment the score when the player reaches one of the houses. And what else? Oh, the other case where we increment the score is with this one, 10 points for each step. So what I'm doing here is I add a new variable called player last y, the y position. So it is the last position that the last y position that the player has. Actually, it shouldn't be last; it should be like max y. Actually, I'm gonna change it, because last it will appear that I'm updating this value every time the player changes the position, but actually I'm only updating the value to the max y that the player reaches. And the one thing that's really important is that the default value of this player max should be equal to the initial position of the player, because, and I did this error when I was implementing, when the player is moving up, we are not actually, man, it should be not. Okay, yeah. So it shouldn't be the player max y, but yeah, player mean y. I'm going to change it again, not max y, but mean y. And this and why is this? Because remember that the origin on our scene is on the top left corner, so the coordinate here is 0, and the coordinate here is 448. 512, which is the height of our screen. So when the player is actually moving up, it's decreasing its y position. So actually, this is the player mean y, so the mean y position that the player reached, and that's the one we are going to use. And we need to set the default value to the initial one, which is here. And now what I'm doing is I created a new block called frog moved up. This block is being called every time the frog moves up, and it's being called from the frog movement. We'll see that in just a bit. And what I'm doing here is that if the y of the player is less than the player mean y, meaning that this means that the player is now above than it was before, I'm updating the value. I'm updating the value. This is not the last created actor. I'm updating the value of the player. So I'm setting the player mean y to the y of the player, and I'm incrementing score by 10. So what this does is that it will only increment the score by 10 every time, only when the player reach like a smaller value on the y position. It makes a little bit it's a little bit confusing because the player is moving up and we are decreasing the y, but that's how the game works, the coordinate system. So, and this is how we are incrementing score by 10. And so just to show you, the frog moved up, and I'm calling this from the frog movement here. Frog movement, and we have our own block called move up. So every time the frog moves up, I'm just using frog moved up, and this is calling this block and doing this. And let me see what else. So we have the 10 points, we have the 50 points, we have 1000 points, and these ones we still don't have it because we don't have the timer yet working. We are going to add it on the next video. And this is it, I think. So let me just check if I forgot anything. Red font, score label. Yeah. So this is it, the game manager. We have the increment score, we have the score and the score label. We are using the score label to draw on the screen. And yes, let me just check if everything is still working. Okay, so yes, the score going up. Oh, we still have that bug when we jump sometimes over the turtles, or oh, that was my mistake, or the logs. Okay, I can't seem to get to a house. Oh, and also, this is important, I forgot about this. You can see that now this is not the score is not incrementing. And that's because when the player dies, we don't reset the player mean y. We only reset the player mean y when the player wins. So when we reach a house and the player comes back to the beginning, then the player mean y is already with the initial value, and so the player can increment the score again. But when he dies in somewhere in the middle of the game screen, we are not resetting the player mean y, so the player won't get score until he reaches the actual point that he was before he died. And so what I'm doing is frog wins. Yeah, in the frog wins, you can see that here, when we kill the player, we are setting the player mean y to 448, which is the initial position, but we are not doing that when the player loses. So that's also an important detail. And this is it. So for this video about keeping score, so probably on the next one, I'm going to deal with the timer. Maybe the timer, or let me see what else are we missing. We are missing the timer, and yes, so we are missing the timer, we are missing the number of lives, and eventually the high score, and starting the game and finishing the game, something like that. So probably the next one will be the timer. So this is it. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.